Hello, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that you're here. I'm Dr. Helen Fisher. I'm a biological anthropologist and senior research fellow at the Kinsey Institute. I'm also chief science advisor to Match. And with me today is my very close friend and colleague, Dr. Justin Garcia. He's an evolutionary biologist and a sex and love researcher and director of the Kinsey Institute. So Justin and I are here today to talk about 10 myths that we have discovered about love, dating, sex, romance, and attachment. And we're taking all of our data from an annual study that we do with Match called Singles in America. We've done it for 10 years. It's a demographically representative sample of Americans based on the US Census. So, Justin, why don't you say a little bit more about who you are and what's going on here?
Sure. Thanks, Helen. It's always great to be with you, even virtually. So you might ask, why have Helen and I spent the last decade studying singles in the United States? And the reason is because in the United States population today, with over 330 million adults, over a third of those adults are single at any given time. It's over 100 million people in the United States moving in and out of romantic and sexual relationships. So when we talk about singles, we define them as being unmarried, not in a committed romantic relationship, and importantly, also not cohabiting with a romantic or sexual partner. Increasingly today, people might live with their partner, but not necessarily be engaged or married, or even necessarily have a formal relationship. So, this third of the adult population that's single, they have an enormous capacity to influence American culture and social life. We talk about things sometimes like the power of the woman vote or a particular racial or ethnic group's influence on the economy. What about singles? With over 100 million people, this is a group that's impacting the economy, our political landscape, and social life in innumerable ways. So that's why Helen and I said, well, we want to better understand, and we have to team up with our colleagues at Match to really do this study right. We don't survey people who are on Match, but we do this demographically representative sample of people from all over the country, as Helen said.
So, what we've decided to do is pick 10 myths that we're convinced are floating around. So, the very first myth: technology is killing love. Really? Technology can't kill love. I and my colleagues have put over 100 people into a brain scanner who were madly in love, rejected in love, and in love long term. And we know that this is a basic brain system. It's a basic brain system, just like the fear system or the anger system or the joy system or the surprise system. It's not going to change whether you swipe left or right on Tinder. It's going to be with us forever. It evolved millions of years ago. It's a completely adaptable, and it will survive as long as we remain as a species. Love will live. Technology can't kill it. As a matter of fact, what we found in the brain was when you're madly in love, there's activity in a tiny little factory near the base of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA. And that's what it pumps out dopamine. And dopamine is what gives you that elation, the giddiness, the euphoria, the possessiveness, the craving, the motivation, the intrusive thinking of intense feelings of romantic love. So it's going to be around. But in fact, that little factory lies right next to the factory that orchestrates thirst and hunger. Thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love drives you to form a partnership and send your DNA into tomorrow. So we call it a survival mechanism. No wonder Cupid will always triumph over COVID. But even though technology can't kill love, there certainly are changes in how we court. And so, Justin, why don't you take this away? I mean, what are some of the new habits, the new taboos, the new rules of courting on the internet?
Absolutely. So when we think about that, and I think I love how you frame it, Helen, in terms of really understanding how, love is part of our DNA. It's part of the fabric of the human animal, the capacity to form intense romantic relationships, and the drive, the thirst, the hunger to form those close relationships. So one of the interesting things about that we see and that we've been able to map over the last 10 years is that increasingly people turn to the internet and apps to find their partners. In fact, it is now the most common way for people to find their most recent date. As an example, we ask people every year where they found their recent date, and only 6% of people, this is the year before COVID, things are a little bit different this year, but the year before COVID, only 6% found their most recent date in a bar, where over 40% on the internet or an app. And we know that's become the most common way. So, exactly what Helen was saying, we know that people still have this capacity to try and seek out forming partners, particularly singles, but we're turning to new technologies to try and do that. The internet and apps are becoming the most common way that we're trying to connect. And people are increasingly using their phones, they're increasingly using new technologies to try and meet someone. So, let's talk through a little more. I know you've got some lined up that you want to share, Helen.
Well, I mean, I found it very interesting that, everybody's using emojis these days. And apparently, the thing is, you shouldn't use more than three, 1 to 3 of them. And the ones that they generally use are the wink and the smiley face and the kiss. Those aren't the ones that I use. I use the dancing girl and the wine glass and the balloons and I don't know. But anyway, the beauty of it is that, when it's a beautiful way to express your feelings. And that's what singles say. They're turning to any kind of device they can in order to express themselves on the internet.
Exactly. And one of the things that we've argued is that when we look at these use of emojis, particularly in apps and even in emails or any kind of digital connection, it's a way that we can show affect and try and put emotion into our messages. So Helen said people use 1 to 3. Part of what that means is that if you use too many, there is sometimes you can be viewed as being too affective. Just as in a normal interpersonal interaction, people who are overly emotional, well, it turns out that you can also do that on text messages.
And speaking of texts, I mean, we're having new taboos, not just rules, but taboos, things that people, it's not spoken, it's not written, it's not liturgical, et cetera. And I was very interested in, how people use their cell phones and how they use the texting. I mean, people don't like all caps. They don't like something very short like, hey, you. They don't like bad grammar. I think that says a lot about American society right now. They really don't like it if you go into a bar or a restaurant and keep your phone, face up and keep checking it or bring it to the bathroom or bring it outside. In fact, as they say, don't give her flowers, don't give him a present. Just pick up your phone and turn it off in front of them and put it in your pocket. And that's the way to say that I've gotten interested in you.
Yeah, and I think that's such great advice, and it really is. It's advice is based on our data that really because what we know is that in this technological era, it's so easy to be distracted. And what we see, and what we'll talk about in some of our other data as well, is that people really want someone's attention, particularly if you're on a date. So I think that idea of putting your phone in your pocket and keeping it there, really focusing on someone that you're trying to connect with, whether you use those technologies to form connections, that can work, but really trying to focus on that person. And when I think of some of the other data points we have on the emojis as well, I love that people who use those emojis go on more dates, they have more sex. And then I remember we started asking about sexting and thinking about, well, what are some other ways that people are communicating on these digital platforms? And in one of our first studies, we found that people tend to sext often as a way to flirt, whether they're sending messages or images, but they do it a little bit more with someone that they've already established a connection with. But then there's different types of sexting. It's not always great. And should I go with this one, Helen? You want to talk about the... So we also asked people about unsolicited sexting, what is sometimes called a dick pic. Again, that's the technical term. And so we know that people also send genital images. And it's been a rising phenomena that we're seeing among men in particular, sending images of their penis and their genitals, often as a way of courtship. And Helen and I have often joked to say, well, maybe it's a form of sort of biological advertising and saying, let's cut to the chase. But how is it really received? And in one of our papers that we published, Helen and I and a few of our colleagues, we tried to look at that. And first we asked women how they felt about these unsolicited genital images, a particular form of sexting. And 50% of women said that they felt grossed out when they received one. And 46% of women said they felt disrespected. And over a third of women actually endorsed multiple negative emotional reactions to receiving an unsolicited sexual image. So it's not in terms of sexting where you're going back and forth and you're expecting it or you even asked for it, but when it kind of comes out of the blue. Now, we then asked men what they thought when they were sending those messages that half of women said they were grossed out by. 61% of men said, well, I thought I was asked for it. And 45% of men said, well, I did it to turn the other person on. 4 out of 10 men said they did it because they were flirting. So this is what what behavioral scientists call an a sexual overperception bias, where one sex or gender misperceives, in this case, overperceives the interest of the other sex or gender. So it's really interesting case, I think, of men sending these nude images without being asked because they think it's fun. But in fact, women were saying it wasn't. We also asked gay and bisexual men, so that was in the heterosexual context, and then among gay and bisexual men, and a similar thing happened in that case. Many gay and bisexual men reported also receiving them, but they were more like other men in terms of their reactions. They thought it was more fun and flirty.
Wow. There's so many. I mean, we're at such an interesting time in human evolution. We're shedding the last 10 years of all of our beliefs that a woman's place is in the home, virginity at marriage, a man's head of the household till death do us part. And we're right here building these new belief systems and understanding so much more. This is why we're calling it a dating renaissance, because more and more people are literally looking for a long-term committed relationship, men as well as women. So on to number 2. Looks are all that matters. How about that, Justin? Looks
Sure.
are all that matters. It's a myth.
Yeah, it is a myth. You're right. And, I think there's two parts of it that looks do matter somewhat, right? We know that physical appearance does matter somewhat when you're in the mating and dating game. And part of that is evolutionary. So I'm an evolutionary biologist. Helen's a biological anthropologist. And we're both interested in sort of how the human animal, our deep evolutionary story, influences some of the things we do today. And we do know that appearance does somewhat matter. You don't want to look like a schlub on a first date. That's not a good idea. And things like facial symmetry is important to the biological story, and complexion. And increasingly, data even shows that you can do things to change some of that. And that's a lot like other animals in the world. So we know that when I was a kid, we had a big fish tank, and I used to get, you could buy fish food in the pet store that would make their colors brighter. Turns out that kind of food, whether it's for fish or birds, it's loaded with carotenoids. And what that does is it makes the coloration brighter. Well, humans have similar effects. The healthier we are, the certain types of food that we eat, we have that kind of glow. You look healthy. Turns out partners are interested in that kind of physical appearance. But to the myth that Helen said is that all that matters? Is that really what's driving us? Are we just focused on how bright your tail feathers are? It turns out that's not the case with humans. So we asked people over several years about what some of the things are that drive them the most when they're looking for a new partner. One of my favorites was we asked people their top partner preferences for singles. And I'm going to share those with you. So these are the top preferences that singles had. So over 5,000 singles one year we asked. And we repeated this same finding in a different year. 78% said that the top preference for them was a partner that treats them with respect. 75%, 3/4, someone who can trust and confide in. 59% said that they wanted a partner with a sense of humor. Humor is a really interesting one because it also demonstrates intelligence and your ability to respond to an environment or respond to a sort of social context. It's something I know on a personal level, Helen and I deeply value humor in our partners because we joke. It gets you through the day, even tough times like COVID. And 53% said that they want a partner comfortable communicating their wants and desires. 52% a partner comfortable communicating about sexuality and their sexual desires. I find that to be an interesting one because we know in a lot of the big meta-analysis studies that sexual dissatisfaction is one of the biggest predictors of divorce in married couples. So a little over half of singles are saying, I want someone who's comfortable talking about their sexuality. And 52% want a partner that makes enough time for them. So what we see in those top categories is a large number of singles are talking about things about their partner, about having a connection, about communicating, of someone who respects them and wants to be with them. It goes back to what you were just saying, Helen, about vulnerability. I think in this new generation of dating that we're seeing now, people are really want to focus on partners that they get to know, and that person also gets to know them.
Yeah, and that's going to be make for longer term partnership. And another thing that we discovered, we asked, what are the first 3 things that you notice in a person when you first see them? And we looked at this data, and the first three things are their teeth, their grammar, and their self confidence. And as soon as I saw that, I said, oh, wow, here's a Darwinian evolutionary strategy into the brain. I mean, all of these thousands of Americans, this is what they noticed: their teeth, their grammar, and their self confidence. And it began to occur to me, wow, your teeth show your age. Your grammar shows your background and your education, and your self confidence shows your maturity and your mental stability. So we're always looking for not only sort of patterns that come out of your childhood and out of your culture, but also out of your biology, which is about 50% of who you are. The third myth: LGBTQ love is different.
Absolutely. So we often have this myth. So as Helen said, my other role is I'm a professor of gender studies at Indiana University. And one of the things we've tried to infuse our Singles in America study with is understanding sexual and gender diversity. So we know that the dating experiences are different for different populations, for different racial and ethnic groups, for different sexual orientations and gender identities. So we've tried to take a look, a real focused look at certain groups like the LGBTQ community and individuals who are with lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, questioning, and queer. So what we found is a really interesting story, and I think there's two parts to it. First is when we look at sexual behavior. So it turns out that LGBTQ singles are a little bit different in terms of their sexual behavior. And what we see is that they tend to report more casual sex and more sexual partners in the last year, on average. I think what's happening is that people in the LGBTQ community, because there's a little bit more openness to friends with benefits, casual sex, one night stands, or sex without the relationship context, we see on average somewhat higher numbers. Of course, the big secret about singles is that they tend to not have very high sexual frequency in general because they have to go find partners. But the lesbian, gay, and bisexual singles seem to be doing it a little bit more on average. We then also wanted to understand maybe there was something about the social context or the way that partnerships were forming. So, in one study Helen and I did with our colleagues, we looked at what's called consensual non-monogamy, sometimes described as open relationships or polyamory. And we actually replicated the finding. We asked the data in 2 different years, because sometimes we'll collect data and then we want to be really sure in it. Psychologists often worry about replication of behavioral data. So with a 10-year study, we have the opportunity to do that. And we found that about 1 in 5 singles have at some point in their life had an open relationship, with a consensually non-monogamous relationship. But when we dove in a little bit, so it's about 1 in 5 have had this. Turns out that gay men were more likely than heterosexual men, and lesbian women more likely than heterosexual women, and bisexual people more likely to have had these consensually non-monogamous relationships. In the case of gay men, about 32% reported having an open relationship at some point in their life, compared to about 20% of heterosexual men. So we know that that's one difference in terms of the relationship context. We also know that gay, lesbian, and bisexual people are much more likely to use dating apps and websites. So they're more likely to use technology to try and find someone. And that's true of a lot of minority groups, because you can find someone with the same interests. And in many places in America, it's safer to use these technologies than to, if you're gay, to try and walk into a bar and pick someone up. It's unfortunately the case still in some places. So these technologies and these apps provide a way to meet someone. So we see some differences in terms of sexual behavior in LGBTQ singles compared to straight and heterosexual singles. But what about love? And that was the myth that Helen wants us to bust, right? And it turns out that there are no differences in the love responses. And over 10 years, we've asked people about their attitudes towards finding a relationship, their desire for love, their openness to commitment, their thoughts about marriage. And what we find is that heterosexuals and gay and lesbian and bisexual people are remarkably similar. The big story there is that we're a lot more similar than different across sexual orientations when it comes to finding and seeking and wanting love. And Helen, I think it goes back to a point that you've made for a long time, and you've got lots of brain science to back it up, is that regardless of our orientations, the target of who we're interested in, most of us are interested in those deep, important romantic connections with someone. And it just seems like orientation doesn't make a difference.
Bravo. And in fact, just to add in on that, and that was great. I hadn't heard all of that, Justin. That's very cool. I'm learning things too. But the bottom line is, it's basically the same brain system. You're going to be an angry person if you're an angry person, whether you're gay or straight. You're going to have fear whether you're gay or straight, and you're going to love whether you're gay or straight. So the basic brain system is exactly the same. And that has been proven by other scientists using functional MRI brain scanning. So it's basically the same brain system. Everybody, no matter who you choose to love, the way you feel when you love is exactly the same. So on to number 4. This is one of my very favorite ones. Men don't want commitment. I really feel strongly about that. We don't understand men. We don't understand women either, but we profoundly don't understand men. We ask all the time in our Match Singles in America study about commitment. Men fall in love sooner than women do. They fall in love more often than women do. When they do fall in love, they want to introduce this person to friends and family sooner. Men want to move in sooner. And men have more intimate conversations with their wives or girlfriends than women do with their men, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends, not their partners. So men actually are the more fragile sex when it comes to love. And when we ask on our Singles in America study, we always want to know, are you just out to make love to everything that comes along, or are you interested in commitment? And so we ask this pretty much every year, and just about every year, only about, between 9 and 12% of men actually are just looking to date casually. So the vast majority of men not only fall in love sooner, fall in love more often, but also are looking for a committed relationship. And they're also less picky than women, for good, obvious Darwinian reasons, I think. Women have got to bear the baby and deliver the child, and around the world, women spend more time in raising the tiny babies than men do. But the bottom line is, over 80% of men would make a long-term commitment to a woman who was much more intellectual, who was considerably better educated, and who made considerably more money. It's women who are the picky sex. And what's really interesting to us is that 59% of men today in America really like the feminist movement. They say it's safer and easier and more compatible with them. And in fact, when we ask, over 90% of men are perfectly happy if a woman asks for his phone number, perfectly happy if she invites him out, and perfectly happy if she initiates the first kiss. Women don't do it. So interesting, we sit around and look at this data, and it's just so interesting for us. Bottom line is, and this is just my feeling about it, women definitely want to be absolutely equal in the workplace, but when it comes to love, they want to play the female part as men who seem to be more flexible with these changing times. And one thing that really interested me was apparently something like 43% of men. Now, men are more willing to have a one-night stand faster than women are. And we assume, they're just being pig-headed. Well, the bottom line is 43% of men absolutely believe that having sex with somebody can really lead to connection and to intimacy. So they're not just hopping into bed to please themselves. Many of them are hopping into bed hoping that they can move this relationship forward. And just as a biological anthropologist, sex is not casual. And I don't know if these men know it, but the bottom line is, when you have sex with somebody, you can drive up the dopamine system and fall in love. And with orgasm, there's a real flood of oxytocin linked with feelings of attachment. So, unless you're so drunk you can't remember it, sex is a powerful stimulus. And in fact, not all men are brutes. They're actually climbing into bed with you because they might just be trying to move this into a real partnership.
So I say I love that point that you're making about, even when we look at men's casual sex behavior, that there can often be a lot more intimate going on than we might assume. And that in one of our papers that we published from Singles in America, one of the scientific papers, Helen and I found that 1 in 3 singles have at some point in their life had a casual sex relationship turn into a long-term enduring romantic relationship. And I think the big shocker for us was maybe not so much for us, but for everyone else, was no gender differences there, right? Because although we see that men were more motivated for it, that those systems can kick in. This is so interesting.
As a matter of fact, fact, I got married about 6 months ago, and some 5 years ago, my then man, said he started to want to have a friends with benefits relationship with me, but he didn't want any more than that. And I ended up saying to him, I said, well, once you get into sex, it's not so casual. Are you willing? Before we got into bed, I said, are you willing? The days before, are you willing to take the chance of falling in love? And he said yes. And so we just recently got married. But that's a really important point that, sex is not casual. As I say, unless you're so drunk you can't remember it. And men are often sort of good-spirited fellows in trying to use it to. I'm not endorsing it. I mean, do what you got to do with your life. But the bottom line is, they're not all creeps. Myth number 5: we don't understand men. I don't think we understand women either. So the myth is women only want a ring.
Well, Helen, let me tell you what women want.
That's great. You and Freud.
So it turns out that just as a lot of our attitudes are wrong about what men really want, as Helen just described, some of what we think about women is also inaccurate. We often hear people will say, well, particularly people who are dating, are women just motivated for a ring? Or what about those gold diggers? And it turns out that there's not that many out there. In our national data, only 17% of single women said that they would marry someone for financial stability if they didn't otherwise feel attracted to them and have a desire to be with them. But in the United States today, women are not driven solely by financial stability in a partner. So what are some of the things that do matter to them? Well, what we see in the data year after year is that women want someone that they can trust and someone that they have sexual chemistry with. Doesn't mean they're going to initiate that sexual chemistry. Only about 12% of women say that they'll initiate sex with a new male partner. But we do know that those are things that become important. That just as you said earlier, Helen, the vulnerability, the connection, someone that you can trust, just like the sort of mate preferences we described. And another year, we also asked women, what are some of the things that were must-haves for you in terms of relationships? And 9 out of 10 women said that, more than 9 out of 10, about 93%, said that it was important to them to have a personal space and have personal time, so that they wanted to have some moments to themselves or to be with their girlfriends and their friends, and also to explore their own hobbies, not necessarily in the context of their partner. What was really interesting was more than 3/4 of women said that they wanted to have their own bank account. So back to this myth that women want to be reliant on their partner's finances. Not so much. Women today want financial stability. They want to be able to, from themselves. Women today want to be financially independent. So it doesn't mean that they don't want a relationship or they don't want to necessarily depend on their partner. And interestingly, 64% of women said that they want to be able to have a night out with the girls or go out with their close friends. And that, I think, all points to a sort of modern story, right? A story of modern women in the dating market is they want to have some independence. They want to be able to pursue their own interests. They want to have their own friends. And yes, finances can be important, and having a ring can be an important ritual. But that's not what seems to be driving women's romantic interests today.
And what's so interesting is you say that this is very modern, and it is very modern, but it's also extremely prehistoric. I mean, for millions of years, women not only commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables, but came home with 60 to 80% of the evening meal, and they were really regarded as just as economically and sexually and socially powerful as men. So as we shed all these beliefs of the last 10,000 years of our agrarian past, where a woman's place was supposed to be in the home and the men had all the money, etc., we're moving forward to the kinds of women that we were a million years ago. And I think that is a tremendous step forward for humanity, because women are becoming much more interesting.
I love that.
That's
such a great way to frame it. It's such a great way to understand it in terms of our human evolution, where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
We're moving forward to be, something that's more compatible with the ancient human spirit. So anyway, number 6.
Next myth.
Yeah, I love this one, but this is yours. First impressions tell you everything. It's a myth.
Gosh, it's a myth. There's a little kernel of truth to it, I think, but it is for the most part a myth, at least from what we can see in our data, in our 10 years of data. It is important to put your best foot forward. I don't want people to get the impression that first impressions don't do anything. It is important to put your best foot forward. That's why if you're on an app or a website, you want to put up good pictures, you want to fill out a profile. If you go on a first date with someone, that can matter. We do. The brain processes the information as we get to know someone, and we know from separate studies by psychologists that first impressions can leave a mark. Sometimes you might remember meeting someone, and then you can't quite get a memory out from the first time you met because either they did something you really liked or something you really didn't like. But when it comes to dating and singles, first impressions aren't everything, exactly as Helen said, right? And in fact, I think we put a lot too much stock in those first impressions. What we found in the single study was that 54% of singles have fallen in love with someone, not just like them. So that's more than half of people have fallen in love with someone that they didn't initially find attractive. So you might say, how is that, right? We have these ideas of love at first sight and falling in love with someone. Well, that can happen for some people. But what we also know, it's the data that we were just talking about, that some of those things, it takes time to get to know someone. It takes time to see if they're funny. It takes a little bit of time to see how caring they are, if they're trustworthy, if you respect each other. So all those things that people are saying in their partner preferences and that are involved in mate choice, that can take more than a first date. The other thing about first dates is people get pretty anxious on them. We've asked people about their experiences on first dates. A vast majority of men and women report often having some anxiety on first dates or being uncomfortable. So these things can take time. But I love the fact that more than half are saying that they fell in love, even though they initially didn't have that response. So first impressions certainly don't tell us everything. Similarly, almost 6 out of 10 singles said that they don't expect chemistry until after the second date. So many people recognize that it can take a little bit of time. Perhaps that's why 53% say they'll go on a second date with someone, even if they don't feel that initial romantic chemistry. So first dates matter, but I actually think second dates matter a lot more. So as long as the person didn't make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or it was just really unpleasant, falling in love and building a close connection with someone can take a little bit of time to get to know them, to invoke the bodily senses, to hear their voice, to smell them, to talk to them, to see if they make you laugh, and to see if you can start to respect each other. And then you can start to trigger all those things that were on your list for having a more meaningful long-term relationship.
Boy, I used to have a guy, he was such a pest. Oh, he was such a pest. He was a pest for like 2 years. And one day I fell madly in love with him. And I remained in love with him for 18 years. And we traveled all over the world together. We went to all kinds of cultural events together. And we finally broke up after 18 years. But it's possible even after a couple years. And in fact, we've evolved these 3 distinctly different brain systems: sex drive, feelings of intense romantic love, and feelings of deep attachment. And you can feel deeply attached to somebody in the office or at school, or in a social circle, and times change, things happen, and boom, that brain circuitry for romantic love. It's like a sleeping cat. It can be, boom, awakened in a minute, and you're off to the races doing something else. So the one thing that I say lots of things to singles, but one of them is, think of reasons to say yes. I mean, just don't always focus on the fact that he likes cats and you like dogs. There's this huge brain region linked with negativity bias. We remember the negative, which is adaptive. I mean, for millions of years, it was adaptive to remember who didn't like you.
Yeah.
And but the problem is when you meet somebody in the beginning, you know so little about them that you overweight those few things that you do. So if I had one piece of advice to say to singles, just like Justin just said, get to know them. Cupid can show up at any time. The next one is number 7. Millennials.
This is your
millennials,
favorite.
It is my favorite. I'm crazy about millennials. The myth is millennials just want to hook up. Man, that is so far from the truth. Apparently something like, from all of our data, we watch millennials every single year. We watch every single cohort, every age group, every year, of course. And all of our data shows that only about 11% of millennials, and these are Gen Z or people in their late teens and early 20s, and millennials being in their around age 22 to even age 34. So we're talking about people of reproductive age, the young, largely people in their early to middle, late 20s and early 30s. Only 11% are looking to date casually. The rest of them really are looking for some sort of real relationship. And almost 70% are really looking for somebody who can make a long-term commitment. but they're very careful about it. This is everybody thinks these people are cautious. I mean, are reckless. Far from reckless. They are cautious. When we ask, what's keeping you from dating, 1/3 of millennials will say to you that they don't want to catch feelings, as I say, catch feelings, until they have stabilized their life financially. And 40% of them, now this is amazing to me, 40% of them say before they want to get into a relationship, they want self-acceptance. Now, I think that's noble. The boomers were not, when I was that age, that we were not trying to reach self-acceptance. These people want to put themselves together before they tie the knot. So this is a very good example. They're bringing in this concept of slow love. As Justin said in the beginning, we used to marry in our early 20s. Now we're marrying in our late 20s and early 30s. And as a result, this long period of courtship, what I call the pre-commitment stage of romance. And these millennials are doing it actually they're having their one-night stands, but I'm beginning to think that these are almost sex interviews. In fact, what they're doing, it's a trajectory that we've really seen clearly in the match data on singles in America. They're starting out as just friends. Oh, we're just friends. Then they move into friends with benefits. Oh, almost 50% of millennials have actually had sex with somebody before the first date. Now, that sounds maybe crazy to older people, but the bottom line is I live in New York City. A first date could cost you $200. In almost any place in the world, in America, it costs probably $100. So the bottom line is these singles, they want to know. And, you learn a lot between the sheets. I mean, I'm not advocating it, but you not only how the person makes love, but whether they're kind, whether they can listen, whether they're patient, whether they got a sense of humor, et cetera, et cetera. So they're very slow. They're just friends, and then friends with benefits, and they move out and tell friends and family, then they slowly move in together, and then way down the road, they actually get married. And this is really good news because I've looked at other data in 80 societies through the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations. And as it turns out, the longer you court and the later you marry, the more likely you are to stay together. And this is exactly what millennials are doing. And one thing that I'm really, they've created all these words. They are dissecting relationships. I mean, breadcrumbing and benching and ghosting. But my favorite is DTR, define the relationship. So Justin and I and our friends at Match asked, okay, well, at what point in an early courtship do you ask the person to, where are we going? Define the relationship. And they say 4 months. Now, in my day, I'm a boomer. I wouldn't have dreamt of asking somebody 4 months into a relationship, where are we going? These people want honesty. They want transparency. They want to get to know you. And in fact, they are the new Victorians. And I think the millennials are setting the stage for really few decades of relative family stability. So we were talking with our wonderful friend at Match, Amy Kennedy, who orchestrates this whole thing with us. And we found that 55% of Gen Z, that's the very young, and also millennials, believe that good relationships take a lot of work.
Yeah.
Justin and I don't agree with that. I don't
sorry.
agree with it. I'm over 70, for God's sakes, and I've had these long, by the time it takes a lot of work, I would suggest you don't do it, but never mind, I'm not a psychologist. But if you find the right person, in my experience, and I'm thinking Justin's too, it doesn't take a lot of work. But anyway, that's what they believe. They're determined to work on it, and there's nobility to that.
I think we would both say that it can take a compromise from time to time.
Oh, absolutely.
But if it's hard work.
Yeah. I think that compromise you do with everybody in all of your life. So I think that what is it? Freud said the two important things was love and work. And we compromise all the time in both, as we should.
Luckily, Amy didn't take me up on calling my ex-girlfriends to see if they agree, but I certainly didn't think they were a lot of work, so who knows? All right, on to the next one.
Well, the next one is seniors settle when it comes to love. Oh boy, we don't understand men, we don't understand women, and we definitely don't understand seniors. And there were two questions that I would ask over and over. Amy and Justin has heard this a million times. The two questions are, would you make a long-term commitment to somebody who had everything you were looking for, but you were not in love with them? Second question, would you make a long-term commitment to somebody who had everything you were looking for in a partner, but you did not find them sexually attractive to you? The least likely to compromise are women over 60. The most likely to compromise are men in their 20s. Why? Because young men need to find a healthy, wonderful, beautiful, partner to help them deliver and raise babies. The older you get, the less likely you are to compromise. And they're also the happiest. Now, there's studies all over the world, actual happiness studies in, I think, over 75 cultures. And indeed, we also found that in our Match Singles in America study that people over 50, and they get happier and happier. So you've got something to look forward to. Hopefully, if you pick the right person and get the right job, the human brain tends to get happy naturally as one gets older. They're not prudes either. I love this. I immediately called my boyfriend, now husband, when I found this statistics. Apparently, older people have the best sex. The peak of women's happiness and pleasure in sex is age 66, and men is age 64. And 50% of these people, of seniors, have experienced multiple orgasms. So you got some things to look forward to as you go south towards the underneath the grass.
I love this because we in that same data, 69% of older singles said that orgasm and pleasure and sexual satisfaction was, quote, essential to their romantic relationship. So I think a point we've talked about is, as you said, older people or seniors are not prudes. Sex is still important, and in some ways, maybe even more important than in midlife for a lot of relationships. And I love one of our findings and one of our analyses in a paper from the Singles in America data set was that older women reported higher sexual satisfaction than younger women. So people often think that although frequency might decline a little bit, so the amount of sex they have might decline, their satisfaction and pleasure outcomes were higher. It's one of the things I sometimes tell my students when I'm teaching the sexuality classes. I like when I'm teaching in the fall too, and I say, right, when you go home for Thanksgiving this year, you should talk to your parents, actually talk to your grandparents about love and sex. And I'm probably going to get in trouble for this one day, but get an angry grandma call me. But I think younger generations can learn so much from talking to older generations about, the data are clear that older generations are valuing sex and commitment and connection. I think younger generations that are on the dating market and sometimes fumbling through, according to the responses they give us in our studies, can learn a lot from their older family members and people tied to their family and friends.
Justin, I've never heard you say that to me before. I have a 93-year-old mother-in-law, and the last time I was with her, she did mention that she had a very good sex life with her husband, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And I bet she'll love that. It makes her into a girlfriend instead of a grandma. I do that.
We'll report
Thank
back.
you. I shall. Number 9, love and politics don't mix.
So over the last 8 years, we've been asking about politics, political orientation, political beliefs, and we ask about it in most years, but particularly in years when there's consequential elections, because we know conversations about politics are on people's minds more and might just come up on dates. And what we found in past years is that less than half of singles said that the shared political beliefs were important to them. But something happened in 2020. It was one of the most contentious elections many of us have seen in our lifetime. And that changed. It was a huge increase. That's that 25% increase I mentioned. So singles said they now say it's important to share their political beliefs. That number, the needle moved up 25 points in our study. And 76% of all singles say that someone's political orientation is important to them. 74% of Republicans and 77% of Democrats say that someone's political orientation of a new date is important to them. Now, what's so interesting about that is that particularly in the United States today, what we've been watching over the last 10 years, and certainly many other sociologists and demographers have reported, is that those forms of difference, race, ethnicity, socioeconomics, religion, have become less important to people in terms of relationships and especially in terms of marriage. It's what is most often studied in what are called homogamy studies, understanding common background and interests. They've become less important both in terms of people's attitudes and in terms of their actual marital partners. But politics has become the great new divide. Today, people want to know your political orientation. They want to know, use it as a proxy to know how similar or different we are in terms of do we care about what's going on in the world. So not only is it important to singles, but they want to talk about it. So many are reporting that it's important for conversation. I think 30% of singles reported that they think talking about politics on a date is sexy. So 3 out of 10 are saying it's there. So what we know is that politics is not as taboo as it used to be, because in fact it's an important element to mate choice today. So people want to talk about it, they want to know about it, and we shouldn't be so scared. It's a big myth.
Number 10, COVID ruined love.
As you started us out, Helen, so wonderfully, right? This last year has been remarkable. It's our social lives have been turned on their heads. Helen and I are people who like to go out for dinner most nights and see our friends, and this is really a remarkable time. The very fact that we're doing this digitally and not in person, the way that we can connect and find people with similar interests is so different today than years past. But I don't think COVID has ruined love or the potential for relationships. What we see in the data is that, okay, yes, there has been a decline in sexual frequency. I think we had, it was either 71 or 72% of singles haven't had sex in the last year since COVID, specifically because of COVID. But I think that there's also some opportunities. And my favorite one that I just want to mention is video chatting. I think that video chatting has entered the sort of courtship ritual for people today. It's a step between texting and messaging and going out on a real date. It costs less money. As you said before, dating is expensive. It's less time commitment, but you engage more sensory information. You hear someone's voice, you see their body language, the art behind them, how they dress. I think it's a new stage of courtship, and I think it's here to stay. I think it's going to stay into the future, that we're going to now connect on these video chats to try and get to know a date a little bit more than a message, but a little bit less commitment than finally going out. And in fact, in just the last few years, we've seen a huge increase, over a 25% increase, just in people's openness to considering a video date. And those people who do it like it, 70% say that they would do it again. So I think that's one sign of what we're going to see in the future. I think people are already doing it, leveraging technologies for their social life, for their work life. We're going to see people leverage these technologies for our romantic and sexual lives and not think of them as barriers. Oh, it's so hard to use these apps. Oh, there's too many options. But instead, kind of biohack those technologies and think about using them thoughtfully, using them the way that the brain processes information. Get to know someone, stay connected with them to find and build relationships. I'm optimistic about where we're going. Well, it looks like we're getting close to our time together talking about our study with you. So we want to thank you for everyone who has been here and listening to Helen and I share some of our findings with you. And I think one take-home message for me, and I certainly want to hear Helen's as well, but one take-home message for me from this study is that after 10 years of studying singles, it's the largest study ever done on the dating attitudes and romantic and sexual lives and behaviors of singles in the United States. Over 5,000 people every single year, over 50,000 in our data set. What did we learn from that? And when Helen and I really sit down and pore over our data, I think that the big message that we've hoped that we conveyed today is that there are a lot of myths. We just talked about 10 today, but there are a lot of myths and a lot of misconceptions about singlehood and single life, and both sort of being single and trying to move out of singlehood for those that try and establish relationships. But with studies like this that we do with Match, the Singles in America study, we can use some data and science to guide a better understanding of what it means to be single. And I think we can use that data to have more enriched romantic and sexual lives. I think the future is bright, and hopefully more research will help guide us into that bright future. And What do you think, Helen?
I loved it when you talked about the video chatting. And what's really beautiful about that is, we're now using it really as a vetting process. Singles are saying, before they ever go out and meet, they're getting rid of what they don't want. So I do think that in the future, we're going to see more meaningful first dates, fewer first dates, because you will have gotten rid of what you don't want before you meet in person, but more meaningful first dates. The bottom line is we're going to kiss fewer frogs. That's a start. But I think that there's three basic long-term trends going on. Foremost, this thing that I call slow love. We really are marrying later. And as I've mentioned, I've got a huge amount of data showing that the later you marry, the more likely you are to remain together. So that very thing of just marrying later could lead to a few decades of relative family stability. But there's a second part to that. As you mentioned, Justin, 40% of singles today meet on the internet. Only 16% meet off of the internet. So we did a study, and we found that people who meet on the internet are more likely to have a full-time job, more likely to have higher education, and more likely to be looking for a long-term commitment. And new data out of University of Chicago also shows that if you met somebody online, you're less likely to divorce. So not only are we having slow love, which is going to lead to less divorce, but meeting online more and more is going to accelerate that and have fewer and fewer divorces. So I think those two main trends are going to make a huge difference in the decades to come. But there is a third, and one that we really haven't mentioned, and that is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. We're always talking about technology being new. Technology only enables us to do the same old thing in a slightly different way. What is really new is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. And in fact, I think that women are becoming much more interesting, much more independent, and really exciting partners in a marriage. So I'll just end with this. First of all, thank you, Kid, for doing this with me. Thank you for all these 10 years. Thank you to Match for assembling all this remarkable data that is clarifying things. I agree with you with as many more than 10 myths. In fact, we've listed 101 of them already. But I'll stop with this and simply say that love is here to stay. Romantic love is primordial, it's adaptable, and it's eternal. It will survive as long as we survive as a species, and the place to find it these days is on the internet. Thank you, everyone.